Wulfstan, the Danes call Jove Thor. Now, before I get into this video, I know the title of it may sound very exciting for those who are devotees of Lord Thor or Lord Jupiter, etc., etc. That Wulfstan, we're talking about a man, Archbishop of York, 10th century. He died, in the early 1000s. So we're dealing with a pretty significant fellow because in relation to Old English literature, Wulfstan is known for his homilies, his sermons, and especially the one we're going to discuss today is Wulfstan's homily De Fallicis Deis, which means in English, on the false gods. We've got to bear in mind that the context of what's going on here. This is roughly, give or take, 100 years later, or almost 200 years later, or 150 years later of Viking invasions, if my math is correct. Because I believe in around the 800s is when we have the Danish Vikings, or really pirates, if you will, because pirate and Viking are synonymous. Just as in German today, Viking means pirate, as in Old English it meant pirate. But anyway, that's a tangent for another video probably. So we have Wulfstan's homily, and homily is sort of like a moral instruction, aka a sermon. And so in this context, he's really trying to put it home that, don't worship these false gods because they're evil and they do bad things and whatnot, and people who worship them are ignorant and stupid or what have you. So that's sort of the mindset, the attitude towards people who worship anywhere from Lord Odin to Lord Thor to Lord Jupiter, even the Roman deities as well, right? So we're rereading from this old book I found from 1883. This is in German, so I'll put a link down below where you can read this thing. It's in German. If you know German, fantastic. If you don't, that's okay too. You can just scroll right down in the PDF, what have you, to read the Old English. That's where the fun stuff is, right? So okay, let's go right to it. Okay, so what we have the excerpt here, and I have to give this part because it gives more context of what's being talked about here. And there's a lot of things I need to say as well, because some things, for those of you who've been studying Old English for quite a while, looking at English sources, they're a little different from German secondary sources when it comes to Old English. The translation you see down here, that's the translation I've done, but for sake of those who are actually learning Old English, I'm going to read the following. An man was on Jardahum Ariende on tam Elande the Kreta hatte. Se was Saturnus gehaten. An se was Walhereo. Dat he fordude his achene barn alle boten anum and onvaderliche makure heure lief to lure sona on jehude. He lavde swathage onave anne to lieve. Dachte he fordude tha brodere elles. En se was Jovis gehaten. And so and se warth hetol found. Okay, so I have to read this out because for those of you learning Old English, you need your Old English. So the translation here, a man was on. My translation here is kind of clunky on purpose. So for those of you who are actually learning the language, you it. Sometimes it's nice to get a straightforward, no nonsense sort of translation. What the thing actually says as opposed to fill-in words. I mean, but even then, doing straight translation has its own problems on its own. But anyway, let's carry on. So a man was in days of yore on the island, which is called Creta, I'm assuming Crete, who was called Saturnus. He was so cruel, he killed his own children entirely except for one, and unfatherly made their lives to destruction soon in youth. He left one. He left thus, however, uneasy one to life, though which he killed the brothers otherwise, and he was Jovis called Jovis. Yeah, so I's eventually turned to J's, so the Jovis or what have you. So we're talking about Jove here. or Jupiter, if you will. And he became an evil fiend, so fiend, fight in German. Thing is, what can be said about this? A little commentary. Notice this is a classic example of an Abrahamist conversion tactic called euhemerization. How at the start of it we have a man, an man, was. So for anyone who kind of walked in the room, doesn't know what's going on, if they read this, they would think, well, we're talking about human beings. See that, and this is a tactic was actually encouraged and dates back to the 700s when you had Daniel, the bishop of, I believe, Winchester, sent a letter to Boniface saying that essentially, when talking about like the genealogies of the gods or whatnot, essentially like give the idea that these were men and not gods because they have a beginning. Or what have you, something to that effect, where the main message was when talking with these pagans, if you will, say that essentially make it clear that these so-called gods were actually human beings. And of course, this is an Abrahamist tactic trying to downplay anything that's outside of the worldview of Abrahamism. All right, so this tactic that I mentioned here, we have evidence of it from the 700s, and now we're seeing this again, roughly in the 10th century. Anyway, so that's that. Let's just move on, and then moving on to the translation. The reason I had to read this part because in the next bit, it talks about father and son and whatnot, and so we're talking about the father being Saturnus. And the sun being Jovis, Jupiter, Jove. So here's another excerpt. I'm going to read it out to you guys. Thas man fullan men the way sprekav spechab waaron je talde forthav de marostan godas tha ontam dagum and tha hadanam wurdodon Hu svude thurge develes lara axe sunu was swatach swidor on heaven shupe je wordod thonna se fader ware and he is jetald ake wordost alra thar goda thotha Hadenan und an dagum for godas havdon on heora jedulde. So, translation here that I did here. These wicked men who we talk about were considered. I mean, yetalda can also mean reckoned. Like it's like yetalda or. I believe it's Yetelan. Basically, the origins of a word to tell, as in like to count, to consider, to assign. I can tell that's the one. Discern, right? So anyway, so we're considered for the famous gods when in the days, then heathens worshipped them verily through devil's lore. Lara became lore, but other translations for teaching. But I like to keep things very straight to the point, as it is, so to speak. Clunky, I know, but let's move on. So devil's teaching. That's what lore in its original meaning means. It means a teaching, like the German verb lehren and Lehrer is teacher in German. Anyway, but the son Jovis was nevertheless more verily in heathenship worship than the father Saturnus was, and he's considered also honor worthiest of all the gods, who the heathens in the days of in the days for gods had in their era. Yeah, so like, of course, this is an archbishop talking here, right? That like, oh yeah, if you worship these men as gods or what have you. Anyway, but here's what gets really interesting. And he hatte Thor oldrum namen betwixt summon theodum thon Danisha Leoda, Luviath, Swidolst, and on Her Yedulda, Werthiath, Werthiath, Yernost. See, this is where it gets really interesting. And he, Jovis, is called Thor. Well, I inserted a by there because thing is Oldrum Naman. That's they're both in the dative. So sometimes you see a lot in Old English where you'd have a word that's in the dative, but there's no preposition and whatnot because the preposition is sort of implied there. So anyway, by other name between some people, him, Danish people love most verily, and in their error, of course, worship most yearningly. So this is really cool. That and I need to say that, okay, well, Kevin, these are Anglo-Saxon, so why didn't they say Thunor and not Thor? Well, the thing is, if you think about it, this is an archbishop talking here, right? And it's his, in his mind, it would be counterintuitive to use like the older the native English expression of the names of these gods, because that's like showing, oh, we do have a connection with them. The idea behind it is to show that those are the heathens, they're the bad people, they're different than us. It's us versus them, because you got to bear in mind this is an Abrahamic mindset, like us versus them projection. We go out there and convert them and make them repent and accept Yahweh, etc., etc. All right, this is what we're dealing with here. Okay, so having said that, so that's why we see Old Anglified names that descend from Old Norse. Moving on. So what have we learned from this very text? Well, we learned from this excerpt that the Danes, they called Jovis, Jove/Jupiter, Thor, and that they worshipped him verily and dearly and whatnot. And the thing is, this begs a lot of questions. Just because one calls something a name doesn't make the something into that name. You know, if I call water something else, that doesn't change water. All right, so you know, we have to think about why and what's the context. Did these Danes see Jovis? Did they see Jovis? Did they look at a statue and think, he's Thor? Or did they hear about Jovis and think, okay, I hear his story, I hear his saga, I hear his what he likes to do and whatnot. Okay, his position in the cosmology. Okay, well, yeah, he sounds like our god Thor. So these are things to bear in mind, and like what position were of these Danes? Was it a Gothi that said, oh yeah, okay, yeah, he's Thor, or was it just like some farmer that said, this kind of like haphazardly understands the Norse literature or the oral tradition, if you will, that this loosely called Jupiter Thor or Jovis Thor, or perhaps this was put on as like an epithet. They heard about Jupiter and like maybe it was just one aspect of Jupiter of Jovis, and they thought, okay, that sounds like our Thor. Whatnot. These are some things for contemplation, something to think about. Whatnot. All right. So for contemplation, why specifically the Danes call Jupiter Thor? It could be for multiple of reasons. Whatnot. I know I don't have it on here, but we also learned that we see an example of Abrahamist euhemerization, trying to downplay the gods as human beings, when really that's not the case. But I won't get into that right now. But the cool thing about this is that we have, from the period that the Danes themselves, they called Jupiter Thor for whatever, for reasons we do not know at the moment. But and that Thor among the Danes was worshipped verily and dearly. All right. Okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. This was a fun video to make, and it really means a lot. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe, and if you want to become a patron, Yeah, sorry, if you really like my channel, please become a patron at my Patreon page down below. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Vasuhal.